All right, well, let's go now to North Carolina. And this time we're going to talk with Brandon. Hi, Brandon. What do you got for us?
Hey, Dr. Farley. It's good to talk with you again. I was just reading a little bit of Romans 7 recently, and I was reminded by some of the things you have shared, especially about our struggle with sin and also how we fight our battles. And something I guess I've been learning recently is like sometimes the things that I get tempted by, or that, some sin patterns, they aren't like random. Sometimes they're like related to things that are things that like I've processed in the past, or like things that I have to, heal from. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, kind of with that nuance in mind, like, how would you explain like our battle against sin? Because obviously some of the things in Romans 7 sound like they're describing like the Christian today, because it sounds similar, even though I know it's probably described a little bit differently since Paul is talking about life under the law, at least from what I remember. But
Yeah.
I just thought I'd let you take that for a spin. Love to hear and glean from you.
That's a great one, Brandon. It's a great one to take for a spin. So here we go. We're pulling out of the parking lot. And first, Romans chapter 7. I'm doing the very thing I don't want to do. And, for centuries, people have debated, is it a lost person that he's describing? Is it Paul as a devout Pharisee living under the law, struggling under the law, trying to obey Yahweh, and yet he just can't stop coveting? He can't stop wanting other people's stuff. Or is it Paul as a Christian? And I've argued many times on this broadcast that it is indeed a Pharisee, Paul the Pharisee, living under thou shalt not covet, living under the law, and calling himself, dirty and sinful. I mean, the law is spiritual, but I am sold in bondage to sin. Well, that's not a Christian. Children of God are not sold in bondage. We have been bought with a price. But now the other view is that this is about a Christian struggling. And what I would say is either view, either way, folks, whether you decide that Paul's saved or unsaved in this analogy and in this Romans 7 struggle, it doesn't matter in the end, because there's still one theme, one idea that is pervasive. And here it is. If you as a human, I don't care who you are, if you as a human put yourself under the law, you're going to sin more, not less. You're going to sin more, not less. And that is exactly what we see in Romans 7. Apart from the law, sin is dead. But under the law, sin is alive. It says in verse 8 that taking opportunity through the commandment, sin produced in me coveting of every kind. So sin gets an opportunity, it says, through the commandment. The commandment gives sin an opportunity. Now, this may be hard for us to understand, but it shouldn't be, because how many times have you seen that sign? It says, keep off the grass. But wait a minute, it's a lot shorter trip if you just walk on the grass, but it says keep off the grass. So what are you tempted to do? Well, you're tempted to walk across the grass even though the sign says thou shalt not. How about when you're in a museum? Do not touch this painting. Well, you might just want to get a little sample, right? Maybe just one little finger. And you put one little finger on that painting just to feel, is the paint real? You wouldn't even have thought of it, maybe. But the sign said, do not touch. So it reminds me of one of those Far Side cartoons. I mean, I think it was a hotel, a high-rise hotel, 10, 12 stories tall. And then there's a little pond outside the hotel. And next to the pond, it says no fishing. Now, in the hotel, you can see they've busted out several floors of the windows, and there's all kinds of people who've got fishing rods sticking out of the windows into the pond from the hotel room. That's something you'd never think of doing. But the no fishing sign inspired it. See, the commandment, it gave sin an opportunity. And that's what Paul is saying in Romans 7. So, the debate about whether he's lost or saved, that's interesting. But the big takeaway is you put any human under the law and they're going to sin more, not less. That's why it's so laughable when people get upset. We here at the Grace Message, we're talking about how we live by grace, we're under grace, we're motivated by grace, and then somebody gets nervous about sin, and they think the Band-Aid is the law. And they say, well, you need a balance. Well, you need both. You need law and grace. You need a nice balance. You need a middle ground. Well, that's like saying you need a balance between failure and victory. That's like saying you need a balance between victory and utter chaos. I mean, the law came in so that sin would increase. So that's Scripture talking. And again, in verse 11, it says, sin, taking an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So that's a real gem of a truth that we need to know. Now, as far as your exact question, I mean, I get what you're asking. You're asking about the patterns. And what I would say is the flesh is the pattern, and sin is the power. So you're saying that you've noticed the pattern in your life, that when you're tempted, it's not some random thing like I'm going to go to Vegas and cheat at cards. No, it's something that is tailor-made for your life, for your history, for your struggle. If you've struggled with lust, it's a lustful thought. If you've struggled with selfishness, it's a selfish thought. If you've struggled with criticizing others, it's a critical thought. In other words, the enemy is no fool, and the enemy is going to tailor-make temptation to fit the pattern. And the pattern is the flesh, and the power is called sin. So the power of sin offers you thoughts according to the pattern. Now, I'm just going to get technical for a moment because I think it's a whole lot of fun and it's real meaningful to think about. When I start to notice the pattern, the flesh, the pattern of my failures, that's when I start to buy the lie that I have a sinful nature. Now, we've talked a lot on this program about how sinful nature is not expressed in the New Testament. It is not expressed in the Greek. I've shared the story of meeting the chair of the NIV committee, writing a letter to Zondervan years ago in the year 2008 about the NIV Bible, which contained the word sinful nature. People would read that phrase and they would think, well, I'm a Christian, but I've got a sinful nature, but I've got a new nature, so I must be two people. 50-50, like an angel on one shoulder and a demon on the other shoulder, and I got a 50-50 shot at victory. And so this term, sinful nature, became very prominent. Now, I'm not going to go far into it, but basically they've changed that. They've corrected that error for the most part in the newer NIV Bible. And they've gone back to the flesh. It's not your nature. It's a pattern. It's a pattern of thinking. The flesh is a pattern, and sin is a power. So this power called sin offers you a thought according to the pattern. And then you start to notice this pattern of struggle and you think, oh my goodness, that's me. That's my nature. That's who I am. And God's saying, no, that's not who you are. You're a child of God. You've got a new heart, a new spirit, a new nature. You're in me and I'm in you, but you still got stinking thinking. Now, do you see? That's a pattern in your thinking. It's not your spiritual nature. It's a pattern in your thinking. So we are now, if you're tracking, we're separating the heart from the head. We're separating the head from the heart. Because your heart is new. Your spiritual heart and spiritual nature is new. But not every thought that you think is new. There's old patterns called the flesh. And that's why we have a choice. We can set our mind according to the flesh, or we can set our mind according to the Spirit. So I hope that helps describe the struggle just a bit more. Never be alarmed at the pattern. Just because a pattern is there, that doesn't describe your nature. It's not who you are. It is simply that you're noticing a pattern of the flesh. And yet God says the solution is walk by the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the desires of the flesh. So I hope that helps tonight, my friend. Great to hear from you. Call us back.